Hank Kiroxan's Adventure, A Night in the Realm of Evil Shadows, by Ryan Baker. The day is October 20th, 1997. Months have passed since the war with the Charaxians. The location is the imperial lands of the dimensional empire of the worlds. It was on this fine day, when a group of Empire soldiers were on patrol in a sector of land formerly held by a legion of Charaxian warriors. The group of warriors are collectively known as the Iron-Plated Marauders. One such soldier is Hank Kiroxan. His older brother, William, is a member of the Royal Knight Defenders. The team had come across an abandoned fort in the southern island of Raylanx. "Boys," said Lieutenant Johnson, "we're about to arrive at the fort. What the team doesn't know is that there is a Charaxian mage close by." "Soon," said the Charaxian mage's lion head. "I will have my revenge," said the Charaxian mage's dragon head, "for all that those humans have done to my people, especially the team called the Iron-Plated Marauders." Just then, the team had gotten right in front of the fort. All of a sudden, the Charaxian mage had appeared to confront the team. "Oh, great," said Hank. "Yeah," said Michael, "I thought we beat these guys." "Comrade," said Lieutenant Johnson, "who are you, and what do you want from us?" "One thing," said the Charaxian mage, with the lion's head, "revenge." "All right, boys," said Lieutenant Johnson, "defensive positions." That was where the troops had gotten into defensive position, but that was to no avail, for the Charaxian mage was well prepared for this battle. The Charaxian mage had summoned 3 demons, a great demon and a beast lizard man, a more beast-like lizard man. "Now," said the Charaxian mage, "destroy the humans, but leave the one known as Hank Kiroxan." That was where the summoned beings attacked the team. The team had fought bravely, but it was useless against them. Hank had quickly found himself warped right in front of the Charaxian mage. "What do you want from me?" asked Hank. "Why, you're part of a larger plan," said the Charaxian warrior, "but you'll never stop me." That was where Hank had attempted to charge at the mage. The mage had managed to counter the attack. "Just for that," said the mage, "I'll warp you somewhere that can hold you until my plan is to be put into motion." Once he said that, the mage had used a warp spell to warp Hank to the Dark Realm. All the while, the summoned beings had quickly taken care of the rest of the team. "Excellent work, comrades," said the Charaxian mage. That was where the Charaxian mage had warped the beings back to their realms. Soon enough, 8 days have passed. The day is now October 28th. It is nearing night time. The location is the Realm of Darkness. Hank had ended up near a graveyard. Hank had awakened from his sleep. Once he had awakened, Hank had checked out his surroundings. "Oh, great," said Hank, "a graveyard." Just then, a fog had started rolling in. Soon afterwards, the day had turned to night. "This is just great," said Hank. As soon as Hank said that, he started hearing a rumbling noise. "Oh, great," said Hank, "what else could go wrong?" At that moment, Hank had noticed that there seemed to be a ghost in the graveyard. Hank had started to enter the graveyard. Little did Hank realize is that the dead are about to arise from their graves. Meanwhile, in the Imperial lands, the Charaxian mage had managed to escape detection for the time being. In the Realm of Darkness, Hank had managed to make it part way through the graveyard. That was just before the first undead had climbed out of the graves. These undead have various wounds. Each of them are in a different stage of decay. "Let's just hope these guys don't see me," said Hank. As he was speaking, Hank was moving through the graveyard, trying to avoid being detected. What he doesn't know is that he'll be needing some more powerful equipment. Hank has seen several more undead climb out of their graves. 2 of the undead had come very close to seeing Hank. "Just what is this place?" Hank said to himself. At that moment, he had heard a voice. "Hank," said the voice, "if you want to leave this realm, you must help me." "What do you mean?" asked Hank, trying to find out where the voice is coming from. "Who are you?" asked Hank. "All of your questions will be answered soon enough," said the voice. "To find me, look for the dwarf Abe Orangebeard." "Where is this Abe?" asked Hank. "He is right behind you," said the voice. At that moment, Hank turned around to see Abe Orangebeard. Abe was standing right next to a gravestone. "So," said Hank, "you must be Abe Orangebeard." That I am," replied Abe. "How may I help you?" "Well," said Hank, "I'm stuck in this realm. I haven't the slightest what this place is. I also don't remember how I got here. This is bad indeed, said Abe. Indeed, said the voice. Comrade, said Abe, what are you able to remember? I was on patrol, said Hank, on the island of Raylanks. Do you remember anything else? Asked Abe. Not too much, replied Hank. It sounds like Golar Khan the Charaxian Mage, said Abe. It sounds like he was using his dark magic again. Golar Khan, said Hank. From the sounds of it, said Abe, you must be from the imperial realm of Alaction. Indeed I am, said Hank. Could we get on with the mission, said the voice. Mission, said Hank. Indeed, said the voice, your mission is to battle Goerix for the chance to return to your realm. Just where is this Goerix? Asked Hank. He is to the north, said the voice. He resides in a tower in a desolate piece of land. Said Abe, the place is surrounded by a host of traps. Then let's get going, said Hank. Before you go, said the voice, you must find Galazax, the wandering warrior. His abilities will be of use on this mission. Is that all? Asked Hank. Not quite, said the voice. You must help me. I am located in a haunted house. It is to the west of this graveyard. At that moment, the undead have spotted Hank. Oh, great, said Hank. You've better prepare yourself, said Abe. I'll start out ahead. Excellent, said Hank. You just do that. That was where Abe had started off towards the haunted house. Oh great, said Hank. I'm all alone here, against a bunch of undead. As he was speaking, the undead were about to surround Hank. Hank had drawn out his sword. At that moment, the undead had attempted to gang up on Hank. One ghoul had attacked Hank from behind. Hank had managed to sidestep the attack. That was where two more undead had attacked Hank. This is just great, said Hank. Hank had managed to spin his sword around and hit both of the ghouls. That was where Hank had thought of something. Hey, wait a minute. Hank said to himself, how did they know that I warped here? Unless they were psychic, unless... No, I couldn't possibly think that. As soon as Hank said that, the ghouls had attacked Hank. The ghouls were ganging up on Hank. All of a sudden, the ghouls were hit by what appeared to be a bolt of lightning. All of a sudden, the ghouls had fallen to the ground. What in the realms was that? Said Hank. That was where a figure had stepped out from behind a crypt. Greetings, young warrior, said the figure. I am Galazax. So, said Hank, this must be the person that the voice had mentioned. Voice, said Galazax. Indeed, said Hank, I had heard a voice speak to me. Although I couldn't see the person speaking, I could hear the voice. The voice said I was supposed to find you. Is that so? Said Galazax. If that is true, I shall see what I can do. Meanwhile, in the northern wasteland of Calicon, Goerix was watching the events via a crystal ball. The crystal ball was situated on a stand shaped like a twin-headed serpent dragon. So, said Goerix, it seems my loyal henchman, Golar Khan, has warped a human soldier here, to this dimension. That was where Goerix had switched the perspective of the crystal ball to that of the haunted house. The haunted house in question is the house that the voice had told Hank about. Said Goerix, this should be interesting. That was where a Croctarian dark fighter had appeared. Sir, said the dark fighter, the agents are in position. Excellent, said Goerix, have them intercept the human. As you wish, master, said the dark fighter. That was where the dark fighter had left the throne room. Meanwhile, back in the graveyard, Hank had teamed up with Galazax. So said Galazax, where did Abe Orangebeard go? Abe was headed to the west, said Hank. He was headed to a haunted house to free the voice. Then our first step is this land to the west, said Galazax. That was where Hank and Galazax had started on their way to the haunted house. Little do they know is that they would face a bunch of trolls. All the while, the two agents were following Hank and Galazax. This should be interesting, one agent said to the other agent. Indeed, sister, said the other agent. The two agents are, in fact, sisters. As the two agents were following Hank and Galazax, a bunch of trolls were waiting for the would-be heroes. The trolls were waiting for the heroes in the coastal town of Traylanks. Abe had already managed to avoid being seen by the trolls. Meanwhile, back in the Imperial lands, at the castle, on the island of Laurelax, Emperor Eric Lincoln had been informed about the sighting of the Charaxian Mage Golarkhan. Golarkhan was last seen in the southern province of Zarin. "This is major news," said Emperor Lincoln. "I thought that the Charaxians had retreated to their home planet of Kyanax." That was where the wizard Jeffrey Jackson had entered the royal audience room to talk to Emperor Lincoln. "Sorry for the intrusion, sire," said Jeffrey. "Do not worry, old friend," said Emperor Lincoln. "Sire, I have something major to tell you," said Jeffrey. "What would that be?" asked Emperor Lincoln. "Sire," said Jeffrey, "in all of our attempts so far to find the missing soldier, Hank Kiroxan, they have yet to show results." "Is that so?" said Emperor Lincoln. That was where William Kiroxan, Hank's brother, and a member of the Royal Knight Defenders, had entered the room. "Sire," said William, "it has been 8 days. My brother has yet to be found." "We're trying to do that, William," said Jeffrey. "Try to be patient." "I couldn't blame you for that," said Emperor Lincoln. "If I was in your position, I would have the same feelings." Meanwhile, back in the realm of evil shadows, Galazax and Hank had just made it to Trailenx.as. The two were walking through the town. The trolls were secretly following the two heroes. "It's not far now, Hank," said Galazax. At that moment, the two agents and the trolls had caught up with Hank and Galazax. "There you are," said the lead troll. "Let's get them, guys." Just then, the trolls had attacked Hank and Galazax. "Just try to leave Hank alive," said the first agent. "Indeed, sister," said the other agent. "Goerix wants him alive." "As you wish," said the lead troll. That was where the trolls had surrounded Hank in order to capture him. "This is just great," said Hank. All the while, the two agents were thinking of what to do with Hank when they capture him. "Hank," said Galazax, "it is wise that you allow me to handle this." That was where Galazax had stepped in to deal with the trolls. "This shouldn't be too hard," said the lead troll. Boys." "You got that right," said another troll. Just then, Galazax had drawn out his sword. "Galazax," said Hank, "do you need any help?" "I'll handle this," said Galazax. "You just get to the boat." "Boat," said Hank. "The boat's at the dock," said Galazax. "You'll need it to get to the island in the west." "If you insist," said Hank. "The boat is at the dock to the right," said Galazax. That was where Hank had started towards the boat. "Once you get in the boat," said Galazax, "start heading to the west. It is 5 kilometers from here." "All right," said Hank. "I'll start out." "I'll catch up to you later," said Galazax. That was where Hank had started on his way. Galazax had started off the fight with his shadow wing slice attack. All the while, Hank was on his way to the island in the west. "Galazax," said Hank, "how could you just step in there so unselfishly?" Little did Hank know, is that another one of Goerix's henchmen is located nearby, on the island. That henchman is a Zorasian warrior. At that moment, one of the agents contacted the warrior, informing him on the arrival of Hank. "This should be good," said the Zorasian warrior. After a while had passed, Hank had managed to get into view of the island. "Finally, I'm here," said Hank. That was where Hank had moved into range of the island in order to land. "I sure hope Galazax is all right," said Hank as he was landing the boat on the shore. Just then, the Zorasian warrior had approached Hank. "You must be Hank Kiroxan," growled the Zorasian warrior. "Prepare to defend yourself." At that moment, the Zorasian warrior attacks Hank. Hank had just barely managed to dodge the attack. "Let's see how well you can do against my twin blades," said the Zorasian warrior. At that moment, the Zorasian warrior had used both blades on Hank. Hank had managed to counter the attack. Meanwhile, in the wasteland of Calacan, Goerix was watching the events. "This is most interesting," said Goerix. All the while, Hank was fighting the Zorasian warrior. Meanwhile, Abe had managed to get to the haunted house. "Where are you, comrade?" Abe asked the voice. "I am in the attic," replied the voice. "I must hurry," said Abe. As soon as he said that, Abe had headed to the attic. Meanwhile, on the shore, Hank had managed to battle the Zorasian warrior to a standstill. All of a sudden, Goerix had contacted the Zorasian warrior. "Comrade," said Goerix, "you must use the Karakor energy blast." "Yes, sir," said the Zorasian warrior. As soon as he said that, the Zorasian warrior had taken several steps backwards and started charging up for the Karakor energy blast. the Karakor energy blast is a fire-type energy blast. Meanwhile, in Tralanx, Galazax had managed to beat the trolls. You won't beat us, said one of the agents. Yeah, like she said the other agents, Master Goerix shall finally conquer the Imperial lands. That was where the trolls and the two agents had retreated. Now then, said Galazax, let's get a move on. Meanwhile, at the haunted house, Abe had made it to the attic. Now then, said Abe, I'm here. Finally, said the voice, now, come to the mirror. All right, said Abe. Meanwhile, on the coast of the island of Gozter, Hank had managed to beat the Zorasian warrior. You may have beaten me, said the Zorasian warrior, but you won't defeat my master, Goerix. At that moment, the Zorasian warrior had used a scroll with a warp spell on it. That was unusual, said Hank. Hank, said the voice, come quickly to the haunted house. Right, said Hank, where on the island is the haunted house? It is at the northern region, said the voice. I'm on it, said Hank. As soon as Hank said that, he had started on his way. Meanwhile, on the Imperial lands, Golar Khan had managed to get to the capital city of the Empire, Starwind. Now then, Golar Khan said to himself, I am almost at the castle. Golar Khan doesn't realize that William Kiroxan is in the area, with a group of soldiers. All right, soldiers, said Willem, sources say that the Charaxian Mage Golar Khan is nearby. At that moment, Golar Khan had seen one of the soldiers. Said Golar Khan, it seems that the Imperial forces are on to me. Boys, said William, fan out. If you find him, call out, and we'll come. Sir, yes, sir, said the soldiers. That was where the soldiers had fanned out to search for Golar Khan. Golar Khan had attempted to cast a spell of cloaking on himself, but was stopped by a townsperson. Captain Kiroxan, said the townsperson, the Charaxian Mage is here. William had managed to hear the townsperson's call. Soldiers, said William, he's next, to the shopping mart. We're on it, sir, said the soldiers. That was where the soldiers had regrouped and went after Golar Khan. You shall suffer the same fate as your comrades, said Golar Khan. That was where Golar Khan had turned to face William. William, said Golar Khan, you shall never see your brother. You shall tell me, said William. Not likely, said Golar Khan. Meanwhile, in Gozter, Hank had made it within viewing range of the haunted house. That was where the voice had contacted Hank. Hank, said the voice, come quickly, to the attic of the house. I hear you, said Hank. As soon as Hank said that, he had started on his way to the attic. Meanwhile, Galazax had started on his way to the island. Hold on, said Galazax. Hank, I'm on my way. Meanwhile, back in the haunted house, Hank had managed to avoid getting caught by the creatures of the first floor. Just then, Hank had heard Abe calling to him. Hank, said Abe, we're up here. I'll be there in a couple of moments, said Hank. As soon as Hank said that, he had headed up to the attic. All the while, Galazax was getting closer to the island. Meanwhile, the two agents had traveled back to the desolate wasteland of Calican. Just then, Goerix had contacted the two agents. Comrades, said Goerix, what is your status? We had lost sight of the human who was with Galazax, said Faltira. Yeah, said Calator, not only that, but Galazax had stopped the trolls. What, said Goerix, how could you two possibly lose sight of both heroes? At that moment, in the tower, Goerix had slammed his axe into the statue. It had the effect of splitting the head of the statue. Calator. Faltira, said Goerix, go back there and start searching for the two. Understood, said Faltira. As soon as Faltiroa said that, she and Calator had started heading back to the town. Meanwhile, at the haunted house, Hank had made it to the attic. That was where Hank had seen Abe. Finally, said Abe, you're here. Yes, said the voice. Hank had also seen a mirror. The mirror had the image of the person. Finally, said the person, you are here. So, said Hank, you're the person. Yes, said the person. That was where the person had motioned Abe to get a hidden box. Now that you're here, said the person, we will give you the necessary equipment. That was where Abe opened the box, revealing a strange object. Hank, said the person, this is the armor summoner. What does it do? Asked Hank. It summons the armor of the plasma lion, said the person. To activate it, press the button and say power of the plasma lion arise. That was where Abe had given Hank the armor summoner. The armor summoner was attached to a belt. Hank, said Abe, detach the mechanical summoner from the belt. Hank had followed the instruction. Now do I press the button and say the activation code, said Hank. Yes, said Abe. That was where Hank had pressed the button. Power of the plasma lion, arise, said Hank. That was where the plasma lion's armor had warped into the area. Hank had equipped the armor. The helmet had the design of a lion. On the left gauntlet, there was a medium-sized energy blaster. After Hank had equipped the armor, he examined himself in the mirror. Impressive, said Hank. The armor had a dark blue coloring. On the helmet, it had a targeting device that flipped down from the top of the helmet. Now, said Hank, what do I do? You are to do to Calican to battle Goerix, said the person. Yeah, said Abe, you can free this land from Goerix's evil influence. How far is it to Goerix's tower? Asked Hank. It is 10 kilometers from the shore to the edge of Goerix's territory, said Abe. We will be on hand to transmit advice to you via the comlink. What about Galizax? Asked Hank. We'll tell him to catch up to you, said Abe. Now then, you get to use the plasma lion flyer. How do I summon it? Asked Hank. Access the internal computer system, then access the vehicle database in the equipment section, said Abe. Right, said Hank. That was where Hank had did what Abe said. Soon enough, the flyer had arrived. Now then, said Abe, to control the flyer, use the control stick. For the other pieces of equipment, use the onboard systems. Right, said Hank. That was where Hank had started up the flyer. Now, said Abe, set the coordinates for Calican. What are the coordinates? Asked Hank. It is Sector Talzoria, said Abe. It is directly north of here. All right, said Hank. That was where Hank had used the onboard computer systems. All the while, the two agents were tracking Galizax. Galizax was making his way to the haunted house. Now you know what to do, said Abe. Good luck. That was where Hank had started on his way to the northern wasteland of Calican. Meanwhile, at the tower, Goerix was watching the events. So, said Goerix, a new person has taken on the persona of the plasma lion. All the while, Hank was getting closer to the tower. Little does Hank realize that Goerix will be facing him at the top of the tower. Meanwhile, Galizax had encountered the Zorasian warrior and the two agents. Galawax had managed to defeat the 3 warriors. After Galizax did that, he went to the haunted house. Hey, Galizax, said Abe, we're up here. Where's Hank? Asked Galizax. He's already left for Calican, said Abe. We handed him the armor of the plasma lion. Then that must mean, said Galizax, that Hank will be facing the ruler Goerix alone. Not to worry, said Abe, I have a feeling that he will win. If you insist, said Galizax. Meanwhile, Hank had made it to the coastlines of the land of Calican. The tower's going to be in sight, said Hank, I better speed it up. At that moment, Hank had sped up. Moments later, Hank had made it to the tower. All of a sudden, the flyer was hit by an energy bolt. Arg, said Hank. That was where Hank had seen Goerix. Hank said to himself, that must be Goerix. After he said that, Hank had piloted the flyer to a landing point. He then made his way up to the top of the tower to confront Goerix. Soon enough, Hank had made it all the way up the tower. Finally, said Goerix, you have arrived, Hank Kiroxan. Indeed, said Hank. I must admit, said Goerix, I thought you would have been stopped by the Zorasian warrior. Really now, said Hank. I also didn't expect you to become the new plasma lion. But your quest ends here, said Goerix. Hardly, said Hank. At that moment, Hank had started the fight. Although Hank has the armor of the plasma lion, he still had a challenge in the fight. Most impressive, said Goerix, but I am stronger, for I am descended from the god Zoriaroas, the god of darkness. You may have the powers of your ancestor, said Hank, but evil shall not win over good. All the while, the two were fighting. Hank had managed to get in some hits. Meanwhile, in Alaction, Golarkhan was caught. He was brought to face the Emperor. Now, said Golarkhan, my plan shall be completed. These fools don't know that they're helping me. Meanwhile, back at Goerix's tower, the fight was still going on. You shall not win, Goerix said to Hank. Hardly, said Hank. That was where Hank had unleashed a frenzy of attacks. Meanwhile, Golar Khan was brought to the castle. Foolish humans, said Golar Khan, I will win. Meanwhile, back in Calacan, Hank was still fighting Goerix. You shall not win, said Goerix. At that moment, Hank had seen an opening for an attack. Better make it count, Hank said to himself. At that moment, Hank had used his energy blaster on Goerix. Arg! Goerix exclaimed as he fell. So, Goerix said to himself, it seems I have underestimated you. What do you mean? Asked Hank. Very few people have beaten a descendant of a god, said Goerix. A god, said Hank. Yes, said Goerix, I am the descendant of Zoriaroas, the god of darkness. But I thought he died centuries ago, said Hank. Indeed, human, said Goerix, but he had married my ancestor. Wait a minute, said Hank. Didn't Zoriaroas make a deal with a necromancer? He was part of a deal to give great power to the necromancer, said Goerix. He had help from his cousin, Necrocarius, the god of the dead. Well, said Hank, it looks like I had one. Not quite, said Goerix. All of a sudden, Goerix had swung his axe around and hit Hank. Meanwhile, the two agents had found Galazax, Abe Orangebeard, and the person in the mirror. You shall not get to Hank, said Galazax. Like Galazax said Abe, you shall not get to Hank. Not likely, said Calator. At that moment, Calator and Faltira had attempted to attack Galazax and Abe. Their attacks had no effect. Now leave, said Galazax. Tell your master he will never control the Imperial lands. Meanwhile, in the Imperial lands, Golar Khan was imprisoned in the jail. I will make sure Master Goerix rules this realm. Golar Khan said to himself, I will have revenge for what these humans did to my people. Meanwhile, back at the tower, Hank was fighting Goerix. Most impressive, said Goerix, for a mortal. At that moment, Hank had seen an opening. Hank had gone for the opening. Hank's attack was successful. Goerix had stumbled backwards towards the edge of the roof. Now's my chance, said Hank. At that moment, Hank had continued his attack on Goerix. This is for trying to conquer the realms, said Hank. His attack had connected and caused Goerix to fall off the edge of the tower. Yarg! Exclaimed Goerix as he fell to the ground. You shall not conquer the realms, said Hank. Moments later, Goerix had landed on the ground. You are truly a heroic warrior, said Goerix. At that moment, Goerix had warped back up to the top of the tower. Goerix, said Hank. Hank had reached for his sword. At that moment, Goerix had raised his hand. Mortal, said Goerix, it seems you have truly done what few people have ever done. You have beaten me. That's odd, said Hank. After all this time, I thought you would have your henchmen help you in your fight. Indeed, said Goerix. At that moment, the Croctarian Dark Fighter had arrived at the tower. Master Goerix, said the Croctarian, I was unable to find the human. I have something else to say. What do you mean? Asked Goerix. The warrior Galazax had defeated the two agents, said the Croctarian. Is that so? Said Goerix. My best agents failed me. That was where Goerix had turned to face Hank. Mortal, said Goerix, there is a way to stop Golar Khan and send you back to your dimension. What do you mean? Asked Hank. It was I whom granted Golar Khan the power he now uses, said Goerix. I can easily warp you back to your home dimension. Is that so? Said Hank. In that case, you have a deal. First of all, said Goerix, we must prepare for tomorrow. Indeed, said Hank. That was where the two had gone into the tower to prepare for the next day. Soon enough, it became October 29th. Comrade Hank, said Goerix, as he was standing outside Hank's quarters. What is it? Goerix asked Hank as he was getting his gear. It is now October 29th, said Goerix. I shall warp you back to your homeland. Just let me get ready, said Hank. At that moment, Hank had reached over and picked up the armor summoner and said the activation code. Hank's armor had warped in from another dimension. Now I am ready, said Hank. That was where the two had left for the realm of Alaction. Meanwhile, in the Imperial lands, Golar Khan was brought to the main throne room. "So," said Emperor Lincoln, "this is the Charaxian Mage whom has been causing all the trouble." "Indeed, sire," said William Kiroxan. Meanwhile, Hank and Goerix had arrived in the imperial lands. As soon as Hank and Goerix arrived in the area, Hank had activated the tracking system. "It's not far now," said Hank. "Let's get a move on," said Goerix. "By the way, where is the energy signature?" "I'm tracking it," said Hank. Moments later, Hank had located the energy signature that belongs to Golar Khan. "I have found the energy signature," said Hank. "Where is it?" asked Goerix. "It's at Emperor Lincoln's castle," said Hank. "Where is Emperor Lincoln's castle?" asked Goerix. "It's to the north," said Hank. "Let's get a move on," said Goerix. That was where Goerix and Hank had climbed into the plasma lion flyer. The two had started on their way to the castle of Emperor Lincoln. Meanwhile, at the castle, Golar Khan was brought to the throne room. Emperor Eric Lincoln and the wizard Jeffrey Jackson were in the throne room. "So," said Golar Khan, "my plan will be successful." All the while, Hank and Goerix were making their way to the castle. Golar Khan was putting his plan into motion. Hank and Goerix were quickly making their way to the castle. Soon enough, Hank and Goerix had made it within range of the land outside the castle. "So," said Goerix, "this is the land where the emperor lives in." "Indeed," said Hank. All the while, Golar Khan had made it to the throne room of the castle. Goerix had sensed Golar Khan's energy level. "He's in the castle," said Goerix. "I have a feeling he's in the throne room," said Hank. "I suggest you hurry it up," said Goerix. "I shall do so," said Hank. Hank had pushed the throttle of the plasma lion flyer. The flyer is now going into overdrive. Hank and Goerix are now in range of the castle. "The castle's in view," said Hank. "I'm impressed at the construction of the castle," said Goerix. "Let's just get there," said Hank, "so that Golar Khan doesn't succeed." "Right," said Goerix. That was where Hank checked the scanners for the map of the castle. He sees the location of the throne room. "I see the location of the throne room," said Hank. "I also see that there is a ceiling window," said Goerix. "Indeed," said Hank. Hank puts the flyer on autopilot. "Now," said Hank, "on my mark, we crash through the ceiling window." "That might be crazy enough to work," said Goerix. The flyer had managed to fly over the ceiling window. "Now," said Hank. Hank and Goerix crashed through the ceiling window. "By the ancient worlds," said Golar Khan. "Well," said Emperor Lincoln, "it seems you are back, Hank." "Indeed," said Hank. Hank turns to Golar Khan. "You shall not conquer this realm," said Hank. "We shall see," said Golar Khan. Golar Khan attempts to use one of his spells. He quickly finds out that his power has been weakened. "Goerix," said Golar Khan, "how dare you weaken my power?" "Foolish Charaxian," said Goerix, "you have no idea of my power." Goerix turns to Hank. "Now," said Goerix, "I shall handle this matter myself. Thanks for the help." "Hold on a minute," said Hank, "let me handle this." "I had given Golar Khan power," said Goerix, "therefore, it is my fault." "If you insist," said Hank. That was where Hank had stepped back, and lets Goerix deal with Golar Khan. "Until we meet again," said Goerix. That was where Goerix teleports Golar Khan to the dungeon of the tower in the northern wasteland of Calacan. Goerix warps back to Geoeltora. "That was interesting," said Emperor Lincoln. That was where Hank had deactivated the armor of the plasma lion. "Power of the plasma lion, return," said Hank. "I'm glad to have you back, brother," said William Kiroxan. "Indeed," said Hank. "Tell us about your adventure," said Jeffrey Jackson. That was where Hank had started telling about his adventure. Meanwhile, Goerix had found Galazax. "Goerix," said Galazax. "Hold on a minute," said Goerix. "I am no longer a villain." "Is that so?" said Galazax. The voice contacts Galazax. "Galazax," said the voice, "I have a feeling he is telling the truth." "In that case," said Galazax, "I shall trust you." "Besides," said Goerix, "I was headed to the haunted house to help free the person in the mirror." "In that case," said Galazax, "I shall accompany you." That was where Galazax had joined up with Goerix on his task. The end. Epilogue. Goerix had completed his task of freeing the person in the mirror. Hank had told the Emperor, William, and Jeffrey about his adventure.
Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Let's not forget to leave comments if you like. For more content, let's not forget to leave comments if you like.